Kamesu michachara veramani Sikkhapadam samadhiyami.
Kamesu vichachara veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami.
Musavada veramani Sikkhapadam samadhiyami.
Musavada veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami.
Suramere majja pamadattana veramani Sikkhapadam samadhiyami.
Surameraya majja pamadattana veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami.
Tisaranena sadding panchasilang dhammang sadhukang surakkhitang katva appamadena sampadeta. Okay, last time we spoke about the mind as an activity of the body. We said that there is no separate thing called the mind. It's all in the body. So what we call the mind is not a separate thing, it is the activity of the body. There are three activities of the body that we refer to as the mind. We said these three activities are what is called Chitta, Mano and Vijnana. Chitta refers to the emotional part and Mano refers to the thinking part and Vijnana is perception. That means the activity of the five senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. The thinking part is the mano, and the emotional part, which is in the form of desires and hatreds, fears, worries, anxieties, that is the activity of chitta. So chitta is not a separate thing, it's an activity of the whole body. So today, last time there was someone who asked a question, how this thing called rebirth takes place. Now that is what we are going to discuss today, because people normally think that there is a kind of self that exists inside the body, which is sometimes called the soul, and so it is the soul that goes from life to life. When we are reborn, that is how people think. But here we are mainly basing this talk on a sutra called the Mahathanna Sankaya Sutra, which is a sutra in the Majjhima Nikaya, or the middle length sayings. And here the Buddha explains all this. It's very important to understand that I have sort of summarized this sutra. Only thing is I don't have enough copies to give you.
But I'll do it for them the next session.
Next session. Okay.
I'll get it to
You can give it. I will just read here. Of course, like every sutra, it begins with, "Thus have I heard." Once when the Blessed One was in Savatthi at Anathapindika's park at Jeta's Grove, a pernicious view had risen in a bhikkhu named Sati, who was the son of a fisherman. His view was that it is the consciousness that passes from one life to another in the round of rebirths called samsara. So when we talk about samsara or rebirth, he thought it was this consciousness that goes from one life to another. Now, we find that many writers on Buddhism also, when they talk about rebirth, they use a term which is called reincarnation, and another term called transmigration. So it is important to understand that what this bhikkhu called Sati was thinking in that similar way, that this is why he thought that this was consciousness. He called it consciousness instead of calling it a soul. But those who think of transmigration or reincarnation, this is because there are some people who think that when a person is born into this world, God puts a soul into that body, and that soul being put into the body is called incarnation. That is the meaning of incarnation. And when a person dies, they think that the soul comes out of the body. Although the body dies, the soul will remain without the body. That is called discarnation. And when people talk about rebirth, they think that discarnate soul re-enters another body. So that is the meaning of reincarnation. So reincarnation means that soul that came out of the body. now goes into another body. Now this particular bhikkhu called Sati thought that in a very similar way, instead of calling it a soul, he called it consciousness. There are a lot of Buddhists also who think like that. So this is why it is very important to understand that in this particular sutra, the Buddha is not talking about reincarnation or transmigration. Rebirth has nothing to do with reincarnation or transmigration. The word rebirth simply means it's another birth. So we have to understand that what we call life is not the existence of an entity. Entity is something that exists. Life is not the existence of an entity. It is the continuation of an activity. So we have to distinguish between an entity and an activity. When we take a flame is not an entity. A flame is an activity. Now, when I hold the hand like this hand is an entity. But if I shake the hand like this, that is an activity. So we have to distinguish between an entity and an activity. Entity is something that occupies space and time. Now the scientists use two words, matter and energy. When we speak of matter, we are speaking about an entity. Because that is something that occupies space and time. But when we talk about energy, we are not talking about an entity, it is an activity. So this is very important to understand that the scientist is also having these two concepts, entity and activity. Now what is called quantum physics, they are now confused about this because they are trying to see whether what we call light is an activity or whether it is an entity. So the point is they are not even able to find out what it is. This is the problem. So anyway, very important to understand that when we speak of our life or anyone's life, we are talking about an activity. We are not talking about an entity. Now in this story, some bhikkhus who had heard this attempted to detach him from this pernicious view. And so they said, friend Sati, in many ways the Blessed One has stated consciousness arises dependent on conditions. Consciousness cannot arise without a condition for its arising. Although pressed by those bhikkhus, Sati continued to remain in that pernicious view. Now, a very important thing here is here the Buddha is also pointing to a very important law of nature. You know, in the history of the Western civilization, the European civilization, there is a period which is called the Age of Enlightenment. It is called the Age of Enlightenment because that is the time when science began. When this thing called science came up, they began to understand a very important law of nature. And that law is called determinism. What that means is, they define it as that every natural occurrence of nature is determined by the presence of the necessary conditions. That means anything that happens in the world happens only when the necessary conditions are present. And when they began to understand this, because at that time all the religions were saying that whatever happens in the world happens because God wants that to happen. So it is the wish of God. So it is God who is doing everything. So when they began to understand that everything that happens is not really done by God, it is happening because certain conditions are present. So when the intelligent people who began to understand this, they lost faith in the religious dogmas. And then they gave up thinking in terms of God and religion, and they took refuge in science, so that even today you find that when someone is sick, you don't go to church for that. You go to the hospital to get help from the doctor. That means they have more faith in human intelligence than in the faith of God. And when that happened, that was the time which is called the age of enlightenment. So the people were enlightened, that they began to take refuge in human intelligence rather than the supernatural power of God. That is why today people are taking refuge in science. So it is very important to understand that when we say, I take refuge in the Buddha, that doesn't mean that we are taking refuge in the supernatural power of a God. Buddha is not a God like that. Buddha is talking about taking refuge in human intelligence. The Buddha is a human being who has risen to a high level. And so, when we speak about the Dhamma, we say, Buddham Saranam Gacchami. I take refuge in the Buddha. Dhammam Saranam Gacchami. I take refuge in the Dhamma, which is the teaching of the Buddha. I take refuge in the Sangha, who carries the message of the Buddha. So, to take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma and the Sangha is to take refuge in human intelligence. It is like taking refuge in science. To take refuge in science is to take refuge in human intelligence. And the important thing is to take refuge in this human intelligence is to take refuge in this very important fact, which is called determinism, that everything happens in the world due to the presence of the necessary conditions. And if everything happens due to the presence of the necessary conditions, that is what the Buddha called Paticca Samuppada. The word Paticca Samuppada means Hetum Paticca Sambhutam Hetu Bhanga Nirujjati. When the conditions are there, something happens. When the conditions are absent, it does not happen. That is the meaning of that. It's the same thing. And this is what he is trying to say here. So here there is a difference, that this bhikkhu Sati, who thought that it is this consciousness that is doing the thinking and the reasoning, and it is this consciousness that is going from life to life. There the Buddha pointed out that consciousness is simply something that is dependent on conditions. And therefore, it is an activity. consciousness is not an entity, but an activity. And every activity is dependent on conditions. That's the important thing to understand. So, So, because of this, the bhikkhus went to the Blessed One and told him that this bhikkhu Sati is having an opinion like this. So the Buddha called him and asked, is it true that you are having an idea like this? So he said, yes. And then the Buddha asked, what is it that you are talking about? What is this consciousness that you are talking about? So he said, this consciousness is what thinks, speaks and feels. So the thinking, feeling, acting is done by consciousness. So the Buddha says, you are a misguided man. Have you ever heard me teach the Dhamma in that way? Have I not stated in many ways that consciousness arises dependent on conditions? Consciousness cannot arise without the presence of the necessary conditions. So it is simply an activity. So there are 5 kinds of activities. The activity of the I is the I consciousness, which is really what is called perception. It's not and perception with the eye, which is seeing, and hearing is the perception with the ear. Smelling is perception with the nose. Tasting is perception with the tongue. And touching is perception with the body. So you see, so the one very important thing to understand here is that this Bhikkhu Sati was thinking in a different way. That thinking of Sati is what is called existential thinking. Existential thinking. And the thinking of the Buddha is experiential thinking. Existential thinking is to think that certain things exist. Now, if I say this cup exists here, that is existential thinking. And if I say I exist here, that is also existential thinking. So we are normally doing existential thinking because we think that I am here today giving a talk here and maybe you are there listening, and all that is existential thinking. Now the Buddha is a person who has awakened from the dream of existence. That is the meaning of Buddha. Buddha means an awakened one. We are all sleeping, fast asleep, although we think we are awake. We are really dreaming. We are dreaming that we exist. This is what the Buddha pointed out. And so we have to awaken from this dream. That's a very important thing to understand. So, the thinking of the Buddha was not existential thinking, experiential thinking. It is only an experience. An experience is an activity, not an entity. When we speak of experience, seeing is an experience. Hearing is an experience. These are all activities, not entities. So there are no real entities in the world. Everything is an activity. This is what this quantum mechanics or quantum physics is talking about. That everything is ultimately an activity. There are no entities in the world. So, these two ways of thinking is very important. And to understand the teachings of the Buddha, we have to understand it by beginning to think in this experiential way. Okay. Now, another thing that happened is, having explained all this, the Buddha now begins to change the disciples' way of thinking. So it says, because does doubt arise when one is uncertain? Yes, Lord, it is so. Is doubt abundant in one who comprehends, when a person begins to understand things? So this is another very important thing. Understanding and believing. Some people think that to learn Buddhism is to start believing something that the Buddha has been saying. So it's a matter of memorizing. So to learn Buddhism is to memorize. You take the Abhidharma or something and memorize all those sayings, and then you say, now I know the Abhidharma. But the teaching of the Buddha is not something to be memorized. It is not something to be believed. It is something to be understood. Now, when people go to school and learn, the important thing today is to understand, not just to believe. So in the same way, the teaching of the Buddha is something to understand, not to just believe. This is very important to know. And so, it is only when a person begins to comprehend something, that person is free from doubt. Otherwise, there is a doubt whether the Buddha said this or not said. That produces doubt. When you have understood, you are not worried about whether the Buddha said it or not. You are worried about whether you have understood it or not. That's the important thing. So he begins to talk in that way. Have you comprehended it? Do you hold on to it? When you have comprehended it, do you hold on to it dogmatically? He said, no, Lord. Then you understand that the Dhamma is similar to a raft for the purpose of crossing over and not for clinging to it dogmatically. So it's not a thing just to believe and say, I have understood what the Buddha said. And then he says, he goes on to this idea of rebirth. But in talking about rebirth, the Buddha is not talking about a person, how that person is reborn, going into another world or another life. It's not like if you want to go from here to England or America or someplace, then you will have to get into a plane or a ship or something and then go. So, to be reborn is not a thing like that. So it's not a going like that. So he says, there are these 4 kinds of sustenance. 4 kinds of sustenance for the preservation of life, for those who are already living or for those who are seeking a life. And then he says there are 4 kinds of sustenance. The first one is palpable food, kabalinkar ahar. Kabalinkar ahar, I translate here as palpable food. Palpable food means food that you can touch and take, put in your mouth and eat. That is a kind of food. Kabalinkar ahar. Now this Bhikkhu Bodhi has been translating in a different way. I have changed that kind of translation to give it the proper meaning. Then food in the form of cognition. Phassa ahar. Phassa, usually people translate as contact. Phassa is not contact. Phassa is cognition. That means you understand that this is a cup. If you say this is a cup, that is a cognition that you have understood that that is a cup. That means you have seen cups before and then you have put this into that category of concepts. So that is a kind of food. That means people, that is how they become conscious. Food in the form of emotion and reason. Mano sanchetana ahar. Mano refers to the thinking, reasoning, and sanchetana is the activity of chitta, which is emotion. So this, in other words, this thinking and reasoning and emotional behavior, these are also kind of food. Because people want these things. This is why people want to go and look at cinemas and maybe TV, or they want to play games, or they want to talk to people. All this is because this is the kind of food for living. So it's a kind of nutriment. Yeah, this is why. And another form of food is consciousness itself, vijnana. We also want to be conscious. Now, if sleeping is becoming unconscious, but you wake up, that is becoming conscious. So, being conscious is also a kind of food. So this is why that kind of nutriment, this is something that we need. Yeah. To sustain our life. That is the way we sustain our life. So here the Buddha is here talking about coming into existence. So coming into existence is simply the result of this kind of sustenance or this kind of food. And then he points out what condition being present do these four kinds of sustenance come into being. What are the conditions necessary for that kind of sustenance? And then he says, it is tanha. Tanha is usually translated as craving. I don't call it craving. Tanha is the emotional reaction to feelings. There are two kinds of feelings that we experience: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. The pleasant experience, we react emotionally in the form of a desire for the pleasant things. Unpleasant things, we hate. That is also an emotional reaction. And that is not a craving. That word craving doesn't mean that. It is the emotional reaction that is called tanha. And that emotional reaction is the condition for these foods. So we go after these foods for survival, because of our emotions. It is the emotions that really responsible for these different kinds of food. And that is what keeps us living. And then he asks, what is the condition for these emotional reactions? The condition is feeling, Vedana. And the feeling, when present, the emotional reaction occurs. And then, of course, what is the condition for the feeling? Then it is cognition, passa. That means we have to recognize something, and only when we have recognized something that we begin to decide or hate it according to our recognition. And to recognize, of course, the condition necessary for recognition is what is called the sense experience. That means we have to see or hear or smell, taste, touch, the senses. The senses being active, we begin to, through the sense experience, we begin to react to these things. Once we have seen or once we have heard, then we may become attracted to what we see or hear, and or we might dislike it. So that reaction comes from the seeing or hearing or smelling. So that is, now here we are really talking about what is called the paticca samuppada. So it's very important to understand that the Buddha is talking about our experience. And all these experiences are rooted in certain conditions. When the conditions are present, so what is called the paticca samuppada, some people think that paticca samuppada is an explanation of how rebirth takes place. But here the Buddha is pointing out that paticca samuppada is not an explanation of rebirth. Paticca samuppada is an explanation of how experience takes place. And it is in this experience that we begin to identify things and understand and become aware of things in the world. So by talking about this, so he goes through the steps in the paticca samuppada. So the paticca samuppada is simply an explanation of how we become conscious of a world. Now we have two kinds of consciousness. One is objective consciousness. That means become conscious of an object, become aware of an object. The other consciousness is to become conscious of a subject. That means inside. The subject that we become conscious is the self, myself. I am here, or my mind. So we are thinking of a self. But here the Buddha is pointing out that even the self is a product of this process of perception. What we see as an object is something outside. What is subjectively experienced inside, we tend to personalize. Personalize means to say, this is mine. So if I get a desire for something, that desire is experienced inside, not outside. And that desire is mine. If I hate something, that hatred is mine. So we begin to personalize the subjective experience and we alienate the objective experience. Alienate is to say that it is something outside. Because we personalize and say, this is mine, the moment we say mine, how can there be a mind without a self? So the moment we personalize, we are creating a self. Now once we have created the self, a question arises. What is it that you call yourself? You have only thought of a thing called a self. What is it that you call yourself? You have to show something. What are you showing? The only thing to show is the body. You show the body as this is myself. So the body becomes the self. Because we have to show something means we have to point to an object. And the object is something that occupies space. And the only object that occupies space that you can show is the body. So once you have taken the body as yourself, a big problem comes up. What is that problem? If the body is yourself, the body is not only something that occupies space, it is also something that occupies time. So if the body is the self, the body occupies time. What is that? What is the meaning of occupying time? It has a past, a present, and a future. So if you have made the body yourself, the body has a past, present, and future. And what is the past of the body? the past of the body is the birth. So the birth of the body is the past of the body. And because the body has become yourself, it is your birth. Birth of the body becomes your birth. And the future of the body is death. So you
have to die.
So now, because the body has become yourself, you also have a thing called death. And in between,
It's aging.
there is what is called aging. So there is birth, there is aging, and there is death.
Big problem.
Why? Because you have made the body yourself. Before that, you didn't have a self. But now you have created the self. You are pointing to the body as yourself. And then, as a result, you are having birth, aging, and death. And with that comes all the sufferings of life. So you have created the suffering by personalizing the body and identifying the body as yourself. If you didn't identify your body as yourself, then that problem doesn't arise. Now, this is the problem. So we have, in other words, created a problem. And that creation is the beginning of the creation, is this emotional reaction to the feelings. This is what the Buddha pointed out. That emotional reaction to the feelings. And the feelings, from where did the feelings come? The feelings came from the sensory experience. The sensory experience produced the feeling. And the sensory experience is what is called perception. So this is what the Buddha pointed out. And so this is the meaning of the Paticca Samuppada. These are some things that when you read, and the sutra is a very important sutra, and we have been talking a lot today. It's almost past 9 o'clock, huh? So I think you have understood to some extent. Huh?
To some extent.
Iceberg.
Yeah,
Tip of the iceberg.
you have a question.
Wait, let Pandi finish. No, you finish first.
Huh?
You finish first.
Well, I am almost finished. The important thing is that everyone knows that we are born without our knowledge. It's only after we have born that we are aware. And when we are born ignorant. And it is from this state of ignorance that we begin to open our eyes and see things. And of course, that opening the eyes and seeing things begins what we see and how we react to what we see. So that seeing and the reaction is what the Buddha is talking about here. So we are becoming aware of a world, and ultimately we begin to react to these things emotionally, and it is the reaction that is ultimately bringing all the unhappiness. So it is only by fully understanding this that we begin to stop the reaction. It is by stopping the reaction that all suffering comes to an end. In other words, it's a state of calmness and tranquility of mind. And that is what is called nirvana. Nirvana. Vana means a disturbance. Nir means none. A disturbance, the absence of a disturbance. That is nirvana. So I hope you understood to some extent, and when you read this, you will begin to understand more, I suppose, and you can think. And last time someone asked questions about how rebirth takes place. So we have discussed this point, and maybe if you have any questions you can ask now. Yeah.
Use the mic.
Good evening, V.Punnaji, brothers and sisters. Bhante, from the point of birth, old age, death, okay, when according to Chan Buddhism or Chinese Buddhism, they said, when you die, right, we don't call soul, we call it spiritual consciousness. This spiritual consciousness will take time to take form in our life. So there is an extent, that's why they call it you mourn for 49 days, expecting during that time in Chinese we call it, this period is called Zhong Yin Shen. It's a period where from the death to the rebirth it can take many forms. You can be born in an animal world like a dog, if you do good things, if you've gone lucky in a human. That's why all these spiritual consciousness carry the condition, the qualities. Buddhism, the 5 precepts, that's why we observe the 5, thou shalt not steal and thou shalt not commit drinks and that kind of thing. Now that brings to a questions which people may ask, why am I born poor? Why am I born without eyes? Why am I born without ears? Buddhism explains linked to the past life, and that they explain the way that the relation of cause and effect. Whatever that we do, goods, these traits, qualities will carry through these visual conditions to form another life. You will attract the positive energies of it. Maybe you're born in our heart, or you kill people, you may be born in animal world, that kind of thing. What is your opinion on this? From that death to the rebirth, when you're born that time, right, in different kind of animal, right? Is it the understanding of Buddhism? That's what I have to ask.
Well, it's a good question. Only thing is, you are thinking in the same way that the Sati was thinking. You see, that is what is called existential thinking. So if you keep on doing the existential thinking, you will not be able to understand what the Buddha is talking about. You have to get into the experiential thinking, because this is not a real existence here. So there is no person doing anything here. It is only an experience, and we have to think in those terms. So what you have to do is to read this sutra, which is going to be distributed, and then when you read it, you might gradually begin to understand. So it's a difficult thing. It's very difficult to understand the teachings of the Buddha, because we are all thinking in the wrong way. We have to get out of that wrong way of thinking. It's only when we do that we begin to understand this in the proper way. No?
Maybe, but the next session you will spend more time on the process.
Next time we'll be talking about, there was another question asked last time, how we have to get out of this. That is, we talk about what is called the supernormal eightfold way. We'll talk about that next time. Yeah.
Bhante, isn't Buddhism is about the law of cause and effect?
Not really. Even to talk about cause and effect is not correct. You know, there was a Western philosopher called Hume who began to talk about this, that there is no such thing as cause and effect.
Then,
So
well, we observe the 5 precepts, thou shalt not steal. These are all the cause that you build the good things. The
well,
effect will be more.
still you are in the existential thinking.
pernicious view.
No, there is a limit.
Yeah?
That's the purpose of life.
Huh?
Does a person needs a direct experience in order to turn the thinking from accidental thinking to the experiential thinking? Do they need a direct?
I don't hear you properly.
Mike. Michael is here.
That's the next chapter about they're going to do.
Huh?
No. How to
But
awake
wait.
from.
Ante, my question is that does one has to has a direct experience in order to change their thinking from existential thinking to experiential thinking?
Uh-huh.
Do they need the direct experience? Direct experience, direct knowledge, direct penetration.
Yeah.
in order to turn their thinking to experiential thinking, or just rational thinking, intelligent thinking, theorizing, no, right? So the person must have a direct experience, but through meditation. Only then they can turn it to...
Yeah, you have to get into meditation to do this properly.
Only then they
That's
can think experientially.
Supernormal eightfold way
Next lesson.
is important.
Bhante, you must help us to enlighten in our meditation, then we can have experiential thinking all the time.
Well, this is what I am trying to do.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
One question is, when you say when someone stops personalizing the body, I'm trying to link it with the 10 fetters. One of it is Sakaya Ditti, the other one is eliminating conceit. So which one is it? How does it link to the 10 fetters?
Yeah, you brought this word Sakaya Ditti. Sakaya Ditti simply means personalizing the body. That is the meaning of Sakaya. Swakaya. Kaya means the body. Swakaya means my body. To think that the body is myself. That is the Sakaya Ditti. And then there is what is called the Vicikiccha. The Vicikiccha is simply, there are these two parts of the mind, what we call the Chitta and the Mano. Mano is the thinking part and Chitta is the emotional part. So your problem is your emotional part is pulling in a different direction. The thinking part pulls in one direction and the emotional part pulls in the other direction. So this is the difficulty in understanding and also the difficulty in going in the right direction. The mind is split into two. That is the Vicikiccha. And Silabbata Paramasa means that you begin to practice the Sila, which is the discipline, because someone else wants you to practice it. If you think I practice it because the Buddha asked me to practice, that means you are practicing because someone else wants you to do it. So, but this practice has to come from yourself, through your own understanding. That is the important thing. That is why we call it the autonomous morality, not the heteronomous morality. Heteronomous means your morality is based on what other people ask you to do. Autonomous means you are wanting to do it yourself because you have understood. So the understanding is very important here.
One last funny.
Bhante.
One thing, from the point of death, right? To take another form, is it immediate? Was it a timeline or?
Well, the mind splits into two. This is a problem.
Is it immediate? Is it 49 days transition or Nobody knows because we are having to the date. Then the date will not come back to explain.
Well, very slowly you have to get into the path. This is the important thing. You see, very few people who begin to understand at once, and that is also after a long time of practice. That's how it happens.
Bhante, because people are distracted by the leaves in the forest, not the leaves in the hand.
That's right, yeah. People have to understand it's not an easy job. So anyway, now we have reached the end of our time, and so we'll continue next time. Huh?
Can we announcement?
Huh?
Can we announce it? I make an announcement.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Bhante, for giving us such a fantastic talk. I forgot a very important point. Billy, with your permission, can I bring your website to their knowledge?
Sure.
You see, I forgot just now. For those who have been copying, you don't have to worry. If you have missed something, for the old members, I think they are in Billy's website. For those new members, if you want the recording, you give your name to Billy at the end.
On the board.
On the board. So you can get the recording on his site. You have to say a very big thank you to Billy. He has. The other point, Bhante mentioned about rebirth and reincarnation. For the newcomers, I think what you can do is you go to the Shine Room, you can get hold of Bhante's writing, Beyond the Horizon of Time, and I think Bhante has given a very good explanation there. It's available. Anyway, I think there are some Beyond the Horizon of Time. Bhante? No, I'm talking about Beyond the Horizon of Time.
Different book.
It's a orange. It's an orange. No, this is an orange color with the. And lastly, I have one announcement to make. Bhante did give you an idea what he wants to do during his lifetime. He has in fact allotted his piece of family land to make it into a meditation center. He has to start somewhere. And Bhante has shown a very simple initial plan to some people. Yeah, I think it is with Robert. And so if you're interested, can you see Robert and have a look at his initial plan? It's not very ambitious, although the land is very big, but he's starting very small with a very humble building. But it's one thing we need is we need a little bit of starting fund to help Bhante to push off his project. So what I can appeal to you is that Bhante has discussed with a few people. There are two people who are willing to act as a sort of a temporary treasurer to hold whatever funds he receives until such time, then we'll pass it to Bhante. Because Bhante is going back at the end of this month or beginning of next month to finalize some of these things, and he needs a little bit of startup fund. So we need your generosity. The two treasure people who can receive this kind donations are Robert, who is standing out there, and please Sister Miling, you can give, but just put one thing. Please put it, if you ever want to donate to help Bhante with this project, please give your name and your phone number so that Bhante will know how to, or we can know how to reach out to you and account for what you have received. Please see these two people. You can at any time hand whatever donations you want to them, or before that you can even look at the sort of the plans which Bhante has. But of course, those are very initial startup plans. Thank you very much. I believe you want to make some announcement, Bhante?
I have a quick one. Yeah, I think Thank you, Brother Wong, for mentioning that. We have a WhatsApp group that has been going on called Relax and Introspect. Brother Andrew and myself are actually the mediator for it. So for those of you who want to join the WhatsApp group, please message us one of these two numbers, and we will let you have the links to all the YouTube, that all these lessons that we upload on YouTube, and also the audio recording. Thank you. Just took down the numbers there.
Before we share merits with the Devas and our departed loved one, I have a few announcements to make. Okay. On Friday, 9th of June, Dhamma sharing by Uncle Vijaya with the topic from Dhammapada is a full moon Poya day on that day. And on Sunday, 11 June 2017, there will be no Dhamma Talk. Gentle reminder also on 3 days non-staying retreat conducted by Bante Pemaratana from Saturday 24th to Monday 26th 2017 is open for registration at the PMV office. Participants are required to attend all the 3 days. Buddhist Mahavihara is organizing a study tour to Borobudur and to Jakarta from 4th to 8th December 2017. Please inquire at the PMV office for those who are interested. Meditation class by Brother Chi will be conducted on Monday and Thursday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. All are welcome to join. We appeal to your kind, generous donation also to make our Dhammadana lecture series a success. As the Sutta class are now under the Dhammadana lecture series, there is a donation box at the counter at the back of the hall. Those who wish to obtain a receipt for their contribution can do so at the PMV office. We now invite Bante to share the merits.
Okay, now you have earned a lot of kusala karma, and you have learned about the teachings of the Buddha, and I hope you have understood to some extent at least, and you will be understanding in the future further. And let us share these merits that you have acquired with all the departed relatives and all beings by reciting Idam me ñātīnaṁ hotu.
Idam me ñātīnaṁ hotu.
Sukhita hontu ñātayo.
Sukhita hontu ñātayo.
Idam me ñātīnaṁ hotu.
Idam me ñātīnaṁ hotu.
Sukhita hontu ñātayo.
Sukhita hontu ñātayo.
Idam me ñātīnaṁ hotu.
Idam me ñātīnaṁ hotu.
Sukhita hontu ñātayo.
Sukhita hontu ñātayo.
Ettavata ca amhehi.
Ettavata ca amhehi.
Sampadang punya sampadang.
Sampadang punya sampadang.
Sabbe deva anumodantu.
Sabbe deva anumodantu.
Sabbe bhuta anumodantu.
Sabbe bhuta anumodantu.
Sabbe satta anumodantu.
Sabbe satta anumodantu.
Sabba sampatti siddhiya.
Sabba sampatti siddhiya.
Idam me punyam.
Idam me punyam.
Asavakkaya.
Asavakkaya.
Vahang hotu.
Vahang hotu.
Sabba dukkha.
Sabba dukkha.
Pamucchatu.
Pamucchatu.
May through the power of all these merits, may every one of you be able to gain freedom from all sufferings of samsara and attain the highest and most supreme bliss of nirvana. Say sadhu,
sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Abhivadana silissa niccang vaddha Pachayino Chattaro Dhamma Vaddante Ayu Anno Sukhang Balang Ayurarogya Sambhatti Sagga Sambhatti Mevacha Ato Nibbana Sampatti Iminate Samijjatu.
Sadhu, sadhu.